Hey everyone, James from TDB here, bringing you another Inbetweenisode. Today I am going to be doing another classic reference tea, a classic recipe, one that I brought on a couple different times. That is the Iron Cake 8653. This one's from 2003. I got this from a sample a while back from Teas We Like, so thank you to the folks out there. They also happen to be probably the best place to get kind of a good sampler of this recipe. A little bit on the higher, more aged end. But that's totally fine. I think that's probably the preferred way to kind of understand this recipe. So they sell like a quarter cake set of a bunch of these different ones. So this one I am drinking here is 2003, so it is 20 years old. Now in 2023. And 8653, for those not familiar, is basically the 7542 for Xiaguan. And sort of like the 7542, but perhaps even more so, they are not totally consistent year in, year out. So for instance, in 2005, there's a lot of different productions, and so you need to pay very close attention to when the production date was and things like that. So things like the January, February, March production dates are going to have a much higher price tag than like September, October. And having tasted a handful of them, there is a big quality difference too. They also make a non-iron 8653, and the material in that is not necessarily the same either. So it can get very, very confusing, which is one of the values of having someone like Teas We Like or other vendors to kind of help sort that out. And there's certainly a reason to not just buy the cheapest 2000 whatever 8653 that you can find, because not only is it sometimes fake, but just the different productions adds a great deal of variability and a bit of a barrier for those that aren't, don't super know each production in and out, which I would include myself in that batch. So there's a bit of a learning curve there, but I do think this is a recipe that does really exemplify sort of Xiaguan and the appeal of Xiaguan very well. So I think even with all that said, it's certainly something that's absolutely worth trying. And I had this sample lying around for a while and have been wanting to bring it on. It's not something that I own cakes of. I actually own a few cakes of the 2005 AT that I brought on at least once before. This one is just a little bit older than that, but it's in that sort of period where pu'er is really transitioning into kind of more full-scale production and things like that. So you would expect pretty steep price increases between kind of like this late 90s to mid 2000s range. So even though it's just 2 years apart, I would guess that the price difference between something like this, the 2003, and the 2005 Iron Cake, I think I have February or March, fairly early in the year, pressing would be pretty strong, because I paid about $100 per cake for those 2005s maybe 3 or 4 years ago. Anyways, let's get drinking here. This is steep number 3. With these iron cakes too, the compression is obviously quite strong, so I do recommend breaking it up a fair bit. And even still, even with it broken up, you would think that it would take a little bit longer to sort of hit its stride rather than something like extremely loose. Cheers. So extremely characteristic Xiaguan taste, very woody, kind of that heavy pine trees, little menthol. It really does remind me a lot of the 2005 that I have. I don't know what the storage on this is. I guess I would assume it's Taiwan, like a lot of Teas We Like productions. The one I have is actually Guangzhou stored from 2005, so it's a little different, but it's sort of in the same rough ballpark as far as like temperature, relative humidity. For me, I kind of group them in sort of similar categories. They're not exactly the same as far as storage goes, but you will end up with maybe a similar biological age. Okay, so here is steep number 4 here. Yeah. Let me know what your experiences are with something like this 8653, if you've had some, if you like the tea or not. For me, at least, Xiaguan tends to be tea that I like it when it's just a touch more aged than dye. So hitting this mark, 15 to 20 years, I think it is not a bad time to try them, especially if it's more humid stored. If it's something like Kunming stored, that's a little bit of a tougher sell for me. But I've had some Kunming stored Xiaguan that's in kind of the mid-2000s a few years back. And for me, at least, those teas are not really too ready to be consumed. So not much smoke, but maybe you can have a hint of that sort of like retired smoke, as Xia likes to call it. Texturally pretty basic. I'd say body-wise about medium. These teas, 8653 and 7542, I think generally have kind of mid-grade leaves, which sort of create this fairly robust, strong, you can definitely get some bitterness and astringency, but hopefully balanced when they're done well. Profile. Another thing that can add complexity to figuring this recipe out in particular is FT Feitai has done a bunch of these as well. I think they've done iron cakes as well as non-iron, and those tend to be a little bit different too. You can sort of see if you try them side by side how they're related, but they do tend to select somewhat different material. Those perhaps are drinkable a little bit faster. A lot of sweetness, like a lot of sweet saccharin, kind of like pine sappiness coming up from that aroma. Pretty nice. I would say in terms of complexity, this is pretty straightforward. I think it's a pleasing blend, but it's nothing like where you're going to be reaching way back into the closet, into your dictionary to pull out different adjectives. For me, at least, these teas, maybe I've just had enough of them that they are kind of like this very reliable profile. Cheers. Yeah, it's nice. And right now, I'd say this tea is in like not a bad spot to drink. It certainly does have some punch to it still, some upfront bitterness and things like that. Good minerals and resin in this too, but it's not overly astringent to the point that you wouldn't want to drink it. In fact, I'd say this is less astringent than the 2001 Red Mark cake that I pulled out recently for kind of a deep storage tasting. So yeah, this is definitely one worth checking out. I think this is probably a touch worse than, or maybe in the same ballpark as like the lower end of that set of 5 cakes that I had from Tim and Mike. So we're talking like quality stamp, things like that. I would say this is maybe just a little bit worse than those teas, but not significantly. I'd say this is still very solid and pretty well aged, and a good example, actually an extremely good example of kind of what you're going for. This tea representing kind of just the basic profile that you would hope to get from something like an Iron Cake 8653. Yeah, so in this series of episodes, I will be doing another Xiaguan too, but this is perhaps, other than maybe a Xiaguan Jiaji tool, something like this, as about as standard as you're going to get from something like a Xiaguan tea, and a really good example of the factory. But the other tea that I will be bringing on shortly is perhaps the exact opposite. It is a big green tree Xiaguan. Going to be talking about a couple productions there. That tea, it's pretty hotly debated what region that is, but supposedly those teas are usually considered Iwu. So it will be very interesting to try those and sort of compare and contrast versus kind of the classic Xiaguan taste. So thank you again. Teas we like, go check them out. If you are interested in checking out the 8653, that quarter cake set is a really good way to get a bunch of different repetitions. I know it can be a little pricey, so find a friend, split it. The 99 8653 is, you know, a classic. I think they might have a custom one for that, but it's 2001, 2003, 2005, which is just a great range to try. As I said, that's a very transitory period for pu'er industry in general, but also, of course, the big factories like Dai and Xiaguan. So it's interesting to try those teas. And I think Xiaguan, perhaps even more than Menghai, the standards through the years for their best productions there are pretty good from that period. So I would recommend, I like all 4 of those teas. So in that sense, it gets kind of a thumbs up there. Difficult tea to rate. Yeah, I think it's probably a step better than the 2005 that I drink regularly. But I also don't remember exactly what I rated those teas. So pretty solid tea. Going to give this a 6.5 rating. So kind of smack dab in the middle of kind of those. So I think I feel good about that. Definitely one that if I had cakes of this, I would be happy to drink this on the regular. I think it's quite tasty. Thank you all for tuning in. I'll see y'all next time. Cheers.